Hi everybody, my name is Emily Barrett. I'm a PhD student in the Community Research and Action Program at Vanderbilt University, and today I'm going to be presenting on the concept of power. When I first sat down to do this presentation, I had a moment of thinking, oh no, where do I even begin? So much scholarship has been written on the concept of power, from Marx to Foucault to Bourdieu through to post-structural feminists and beyond. And while there's this rich body of literature and scholarship out there, for the sake of this session, I thought let's keep it simple. And then I'm going to move into a conversation around why the concept of power is significant to community geography. So in this idea of keeping it simple, I turn to the Dictionary of Human Geography, who suggests that in its most simple and basic form, power can be considered as the ability of one agent to affect the action or attitudes of another. And though power has often been conceptualized as only having a negative impact on people's lives, it's a lot more complex and a lot more dynamic than that. And in this way, we must consider how power is not only exercised, but also constructed and deployed. And so we might think of this as moving away from a top-down oppressor-oppressed model to instead considering how power works within networks and flows and relationships and how it moves in dynamic ways. And so this sort of movement requires us to embed power within material and social networks. So why might power be significant to community geography? I think a lot of us turn to applied and community-based work because we set out with the intention that we'd like our research to have broader impacts, we'd like it to be beneficial to the communities that we partner with. However, research suggests that this is often not enough. Empiricism and moral judgments often don't produce social change. And instead, what's necessary is for us to consider community organizing, right? With a focus on the ability to build and use power for social change. I find these conversations particularly relevant for community geography because I think it pulls together the strands of research, action, and praxis and frames it as an intentional exercise of power. So how can we think about power relations and the ability to approach social change through the lens of power in very intentional and strategic ways? And so in what follows, I'm quickly going to overview two ways in which I think we can ask intentional questions about power. And so the first is to consider how working with communities to change and affect unequal relations of power. Right, this leads us into the term of empowerment, which is closely aligned with the concept of power. And I think of empowerment as the goal of a participatory process. It's really working with marginalized or oppressed individuals and groups so that they gain greater control over their lives, they get resources, rights, and it leads to a reduced societal marginalization. Right? The participatory process often is to change relationships of power. And the second way in which we might think about sort of power in community geography is to consider how power relationships inform the dynamics of partnerships themselves. And so here I want to point to some of the special issue in community geography, because I think some of these conversations are already happening there. Jen Mokos, for example, in her study asks us to consider diverse sites of power and privilege and how this might reframe the ways in which we see and define community. Similarly, Amber Boss and I write from our experiences as graduate students to consider how we navigated power relationships and how power moved between and across the boundaries of the researcher and the community. I want to ground the conversation around power within this example of the Detroit Geographic Expedition and Institution. Right, the DGEI and William Bunge's famous Fitzgerald is often pointed to as the pinnacle of applied and radical approach. It encapsulates a sort of collaborative boots on the ground study of a community's struggle for social justice. However, retellings of the DGEI from Cindy Katz, Nick Hyman, and Gwendolyn Warren, who was one of the residents of the Fitzgerald neighborhood, indicate a need to really think about the ways in which power relations took shape and transformed and influenced some of the work coming from the DGEI. And so I don't have time to go into some of the details of these retellings, but overall they sort of indicate a need to really be self-reflective and again intentional about how community researchers approach questions of power and how we model power relations in our work. So this requires us again to think intentionally about how we work with community members to affect and change unequal relationships of power, and how power relations themselves inform the dynamics of the partnerships that we engage in. And so that's to conclude this brief presentation on the concept of power. I look forward to engaging with any of your questions in the sections and comments, and I look forward to sort of the broader conversations that we have around community geography moving forward. Thank you.